So yes, friends, we're going to look for a short while today at the question of what can we make of Brexit, and then hopefully we'll have much longer actually to have questions and answers. So this is my fourth lecture on Brexit while I've been at Cal in the last 2 years. And how can we conceive of it? How can we map and measure the progress of Britain's exiting of the European Union? I think you can look at it in three ways. Commonly, historians and political scientists and commentators and journalists do. Politically, economically, and socially. Politically, in the sense that it represents, at the same time, a crisis, an existential crisis for the European Union, and simultaneously a constitutional crisis for the United Kingdom. That after 40 years of very close membership of the EU, it is incredibly complex and difficult for the UK to extricate itself from the rationalities and the processes of the EU. You can think of it politically. You can think of it politically as a question that was put to the British people, and that the British people have clearly and very deliberately answered, and then one of power, political power, whether that answer, whether that request is going to be honoured or whether it's not going to be honoured, whether the men in Whitehall know best, the men and women in Westminster know best, or whether the public know how they wish their country to be governed. You can look at it also economically and try and understand and map the differences around issues of free trade and regionalism, and the fact that the United Kingdom has done well within the EU, but also that it's actually not been fully economically integrated because it's not a member of the single currency, it's not a member of the Eurozone, and didn't suffer during the Eurozone crisis. But also the fact that the United Kingdom has a different form of capitalism to the Rhineland German model and the more etatiste, centralised kind of model that you have in France. But nonetheless, the United Kingdom has done pretty well economically from partnership within the EU. But the debate economically is whether the United Kingdom would flounder, or actually would it flourish in a more free trade world, given its more liberal, capitalist, more free market approach, and being a nation and a culture that's always looked abroad, that's never been able to grow enough food to support itself, so is instinctively outward looking and focused on commerce and trade. It can also be considered, ladies and gentlemen, socially. Not just socially in terms of whether people are on the right or on the left, not necessarily socially in terms of people's socio-economic background, but socially in terms of within the generations, in terms of identity, in terms of what kind of country do the British want going forward, how they conceive of themselves. You know, you might want to talk of the British or the English mind. I think they're all valid ways of understanding this question. I think they all have a part to play. But it's my firm belief that there is something deeper, more properly basic at play. That's not purely constitutional, that's not purely about state or market or free trade or regional blocks, not purely about working class, middle class, upper class, over 65s, under 45s, urban, rural. But really a question, I would say, that's profound and about culture. In effect, it's a battle, I guess you could say, between people who feel more cosmopolitan and people who feel more, with a small c, conservative. And many of these conservatives you find on the centre left and are lifelong Labour voters. So don't mishear me, this is not a left-right issue. It's absolutely the opposite. It's not a left-right issue. It can't be. 37% of people who voted Labour at the 2015 general election, over a third, voted Leave. 25% of the wealthiest, most successful UK citizens, the AB1 managerial professional class, 25% voted leave. So the data tells us it can't just be a very mission impossible. It can't just be. It can't, well, but maybe Brexit is mission impossible. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe Tom Cruise is going to come to the rescue. Maybe not. Jump out of a plane or off a cliff edge and have a parachute. Who knows? Maybe the Prime Minister needs to do. Oh, there we go. Mission Impossible 2. But I think really the way to look at it is to aggregate the political, economic, and the social. But by aggregating them, not to miss the central point. Mission Impossible 3. Not to miss the central point. And the central point is, I think this is a conversation not just the British, but in particular the English, are having within themselves. That's not to say that the contributions of people in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales don't matter, of course they do. But 5 out of 6 of the British people are English and live in England. And so, as the Americans say, that's the ball game. And I think really Brexit comes down to who are the English and who do the English want to be. They've always been, to quote the academic Stephen George, the United Kingdom has always been an awkward partner in Europe. But not an awkward partner in a rule-breaking partner. The United Kingdom does keep the rules. That which it signs up to, Labour or Conservative governments, in terms of EU treaties, it keeps the rules. Some far more integrationist European countries keep the rules less well. You might think of one country in particular. But it's actually about, as I said 2 years ago, in the Brexit and its aftershocks lecture, it's about heart as much as head. It's not about pounds and shillings and pence. And that's what Prime Minister Cameron and Chancellor Osborne got so wrong. Despite the fact they used taxpayers' money to send me and all the rest of the households in the United Kingdom leaflets at our expense telling us how we should vote. That would just leave that for one side. The fact that they thought it was just about 2 or 3% of GDP and, if we vote leave, just by voting leave, there would have to be an emergency budget. And we would necessarily go into recession. But, well, there's been no recession. Unemployment's very low. We're doing reasonably well. There are real structural economic problems. I'm not a Pollyanna. There's structural problems. The United Kingdom economy is imbalanced. It's far too focused on London and the South East, which seems to be an economy that seldom goes into recession. It's always overheating. That creates a whole range of issues in terms of public services and housing. There's not enough public housing being built, so house prices are crazy, just like in the Bay Area. That's not great for future generations. So this is not some kind of Pollyanna, everything is always good, necessarily good. But it is, I guess, a jeremiad against what I think is a myopic and overtly problematic assault on the will of the British people, as declared in the referendum in 2016. There was a clear majority of 1.3 million people, saying we would like to leave the European Union, please. And I think the please is important, because it was a very ill-tempered campaign, absolutely. But generally speaking, I think there is an opportunity for a return to civility. And I think one of the things that we do here at the IES, one of the things we need to strive to do across campuses, is to have more conversation, more dialogue, and to get away from a more shouty, protesty, marchy, bang your drum kind of politics, which drives people apart rather than bringing people together based around the dignity of the individual. And so I think really ultimately the Brexit is about culture, it's about who are the English, who do the English want to be, and I think broadly speaking, regardless of one's class or where one lives or one's age, the thing that really kind of helps us categorise and understand how people voted is whether people are broadly speaking cosmopolitans or conservatives. David Goodhart calls it in his book whether people are somewheres or anywheres. And I think that's good, and I think that gets us along the road. Perhaps you can add several layers to that, to what it means to be a cosmopolitan and to what it means to be a conservative. And we can explore that a little bit later on in the Q&A. So the current position, I guess, is the fact that the United Kingdom is due, at present, a little qualification there at present to leave, to exit the European Union on the 31st of October 2019. Halloween, make of that what you will. And the Prime Minister will put her withdrawal agreement for at least the 4th time before the House, some point after the Easter recess. When exactly that will be, we're not sure. We're just not sure. There is a small matter of the English local elections on the 2nd of May, and then it would seem that we are very much going to be contesting, hard though it is to believe, European Union Parliament elections on the 23rd of May, which is a full 2 months after, in statute law, that 500 out of the 650 MPs voted for said that we were going to leave exactly 2 years after the Prime Minister triggered Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union, and that was meant to be on the 29th of March. And we all know what's happened. We've had, MPs, and we've got Yvette Cooper's private members' bill, and we've had, historic defeats of beforehand of the Prime Minister's withdrawal agreement to the tune of losing in the most embarrassing way. I mean, a historic defeat. I mean, in modern era, a Prime Minister has not lost a bill by as much, and then she brought it back again and again. So much so that, one has been wondering in terms of the standing orders of the House of Commons, really, can she do this again? Well, she can if she kind of changes it, and I think kind of the Speaker of the House of Commons might permit her to do that this time. But now we have the Prime Minister writing to Donald Tusk, and the EU27 have agreed that the United Kingdom can have an extension. Initially, it was going to be onto the 12th of April, or possibly this date or that date, the 22nd of May. That is now not feasible. So the Prime Minister wanted the 30th of June. But we've been told quite clearly that's probably not long enough, and that's probably right. I think there's such gridlock that it's unlikely to happen, and so it looks like we are in the European Union for another 6 months, which is remarkable because the British people in June 2016 very clearly answered a referendum that was predicated upon an Act of Parliament that was voted for unanimously by parliamentarians in response to a manifesto commitment of the Conservative Party, the government of the day, that this would settle the question once and for all. So the amount of votes, the amount of acts, the amount of legislation, the amount of court cases is remarkable. You might perhaps be cynical and have a more craven view of politics and think that the powers that be don't want us to leave the European Union. And I think that would be a fair conclusion to draw. I want to say one other thing. House of Commons Library, I think, is a fantastic resource. It's the House of Commons Library. It's not just a library. It's in effect a research centre. They put all their briefing notes on their website. It's a fantastic, publicly funded, impartial, serious research outlet, and I encourage my students to use their briefing notes in their dissertations and their honours thesis. So if you're interested, I always think the House of Commons Library is really good, and I've put a little link there for you. So currently, we're in this process, I guess you could say, of decentering. That Brexit has decentered British politics. In other words, it's shaken it up. It's about shock and schism. It has thrown established realities into question. It has, in terms of political parties, it has forged 2 new parties. We have 2 new parties, Change.uk. Before they were registered as a party, a few months ago, they were the independent group. These are 11 MPs, men and women, some from the Conservative Party, some from the Labour Party. And they've come together. They want Britain to stay in the EU. They want Britain to have a second referendum to try and, so they can argue to stay in the EU. Also, some of the Labourites that left because Jeremy Corbyn's leadership has been ambivalent at best about staying in the EU, because as a member of the hard left of the Labour movement, he has been a Eurosceptic historically. He's now a Remainer, he says. the fringes of the right of the Tories and the left of Labour have always been, for very different reasons, sceptical of the project of European Union. But also Luciana Berger left the Labour Party because of the dreadful anti-Semitism that there has been in the Labour Party now for a number of years, which is often really prevalent on the left, deeply prevalent on the left. We know the form of anti-Semitism which is prevalent among ethno-nationalists on the right. There's a real dreadful problem on the left, a deeply arrogant problem in certain caucuses of the left is not just for trying to be critical of the state of Israel, but actually is deeply troubling to anyone who wants to respect the innate dignity of all peoples. So that's why the MP Luciana Berger left, and then many of the other MPs acknowledged that that is a problem that the Labour leadership really has tried to get a grip of, but clearly hasn't. And yes, make of that what you will. So the other group is a group that's been set up more recently by Nigel Farage, which is the Brexit Party. It's a single issue group, I guess a little bit like Change.uk, trying to keep Britain in the EU, trying to get Britain to come to a position where it's going to honour the referendum of the sovereign British people of 2016. And it's less of a mixed bag. It's got lots of former UKIP MEPs have come across to it, troubled by the fact that UKIP seems to have taken on support of elements of the far right, and but also former Conservative MPs, Anne Widdecombe, former Home Office Minister, as well, but also Claire Fox, who was part of the Revolutionary Communist Party back in the 1970s and 80s, who is now more of a libertarian. Yeah, so they are standing, they are fielding candidates in the European Union Parliament elections on the 23rd of May. So we have this decentering approach which is shaking up British politics, and it's going to be a real challenge, I think, especially to the Conservative Party, to Labour to an extent, but also to the Conservative Party, I think. My prediction is that the Brexit Party will do better than Change.uk. I think the Brexit Party is it does what it says on the tin, to use an English phrase from a TV ad. It's seeking to do one thing. It wants Britain to leave the EU, honouring the referendum of 2016. And I can't imagine, if that happens eventually, and I can't imagine this party going on for any great length of time. I think the Change.uk group, which was the independent group, I think they have aspirations to be more of a progressive Blairite kind of presence in Parliament, because they feel that the Labour Party has become very much a party of the far left, not the far left, the hard left of the Labour movement. Far left kind of suggests communist or something like that, but certainly hard left. And so they would like a lot more of the progressives who are currently still in the Labour Party to go with them. So I think in terms of where are we now with Brexit, there is a clear, not so much realignment, that's too strong, because to get the realignment you need to show that there is actually lots of voter support for these new parties. But watch this space, ladies and gentlemen, watch this space. But what about the United States? We're in the United States. What about the United States? Well, what does Brexit mean? Well, at the moment, I would say it's steady state. I think it's steady state, and I think it's steady state because if we look at the data, and this data, first lot of data comes from the US Census Bureau, and then the next set of data comes from the California Chamber of Commerce, and I was just speaking there yesterday in Sacramento for the IES. I think what the data shows us is that actually this is a close relationship that's growing. This is a relationship of mutual economic interest, mutual trading interest, but more than that. But we'll come back to that in a minute. But a good, solid trading interest, where about 1 million Americans are employed by British firms, 1 million Brits are employed by American firms, and where there is, at the moment, the United States has a trade surplus with the UK, not by a huge amount. So that's quite helpful that it's reasonably balanced. And also, the goods that are traded are not in incredibly different sectors. They're different perhaps within certain sectors, but there's lots of high-end technical goods as well as advanced chemicals and and components for tech and the computer industry as well. So there is quite a lot of goods traded within similar sectors, which seems to be mutually beneficial. And the US-UK investment relationship over $1 trillion in 2016, that's the largest of any bilateral trading partnership in the world. So that's quite significant, and that's quite notable, I think. So it shows about long-term investment by companies in each other's countries, which would suggest that despite the uncertainty since 2016 and the uncertainty now, that there is a willingness to say, look, we have shared interests, we can do business, we share a common language, we share values, there's lots of exchange and travel, we can make this work. So I think that's really quite optimistic. But some people might say, well, we are in the United States, Matt, but more importantly, we're in the great state of California. So what about California? So, and I think that would be a fair point. Well, a minute ago I said that there's 1 million Americans employed by British firms. That's true. But the important coda here is that 900,000 of them, so 90% of them, are Californian jobs, are Californian employees employed by British firms. So I think what I just said about the UK-US relationship is even more so the case for California and the United Kingdom. So I think that's important. In terms of UK importing 5.2 billion of goods and services, 5.5 California importing British goods. Again, similar. So it's a relationship which is, it seems to be mutually beneficial. It seems to be founded on long ties of not just economic advantage, which is essential in market economies, but also trust and similarities in interests and language and tradition. And I think that's important to flag up, especially seeing as we have interests here today with the Anglo-American Studies program. And I think we should talk more about Anglo-American relationships, and we should have confidence to do that. And we shouldn't, as you find in some quarters, feel inhibited to talk about the benefits between the United Kingdom and the US. As if in some quarters, in some academic quarters, there's a stifling political correctness that you can't talk about Anglo-American studies. Well, what rot? And on what basis? And I challenge anyone to give a reason why. What you've got there, you've got two countries who are predicated upon liberty, upon minority rights, majority rule, about essential privileges of freedoms of the press and religion and assembly that are constitutional, that have representative government, and frankly are two out of a handful of 35, 40 countries in the world where most global citizens, if you ask them where they choose to raise their children, would say, yeah, they're reasonable places to live. And I think we really need to counter this stifling, you find it very much on the radical edge, which is strong in some campuses more than others. We need to challenge that to say, actually, there's something special about the Anglo-American relationship, and there's special relationships that America has with lots of other countries, predicated on values we should be proud of, and traditions we should be proud of, and let's have a full-throated defence of those. And that's in our mutual economic interests, but it's also in our interest when we look to the security of our nations and the security of our peoples around the world, where there seems to be a great deal of instability and extremism. Every day brings enough trouble, as once was famously said. So in terms of the US-UK post-Brexit relationship, well, there is short-term uncertainty. I'm not a Pollyanna. I'm not trying to say that everything is always rosy, everything necessarily is rosy, not at all. There is uncertainty, especially to do with manufacturing sectors of the economy. There is issues about stockpiling and holding on to goods, and concern about trade and what have you. And I understand that. And that's why when you look at it back home, manufacturers are very much concerned, always were, about Britain leaving the European Union. They just wanted the steady state, the market certainty point, which is a very reasonable one. But it's not just about economics, as I said, it's about your heart as much as your head. But even though that is an issue, the issue of uncertainty, I think it's an issue within a firm, robust foundation relationship. And I think that's a really positive story to tell. And also, we know that the Department for International Trade, led by Liam Fox, has long been making plans for a free trade agreement. I would say the sooner that happens, the better. We also, United Kingdom, that is we also need that with India and with China especially. And there are differences though, and differences exist. And when the UK comes out of the EU, it will be a competitor, a direct competitor with the United States for market share in certain sectors of certain economies, because we produce similar goods, particularly I'm thinking about California and Britain, high-end technical goods, and we all want, and there'll be competition, but we shouldn't be afraid of competition. We shouldn't be, you know, competition is good. Drives up standard, drives down, up standards, drives down prices. Providing you're supporters of free trade, that is. If you're a free trader, I'm a free trader. We don't want any of this protectionism. Not good for anybody. But on top of that, underneath all of this are these ties of not just language, not just constitutionalism, not just representative government, but ties of culture, ties of values. And I think that gives me, even in an era of uncertainty, even in an era of often ill-tempered, uncivil conversation, it gives me cause for optimism that Britain can leave the European Union, can do deals, can maintain its good, close relationships with our cousins across the Channel and with our cousins across the pond. Thanks very much.